know her name, you know what she looks like. She's been in the game for just under 10 years. But do you know Alex's forgotten story? Well, let's dive right into it. It all begins on a dark, rainy night not too long ago in the Dark Oak Forests. Now, these forests were the home to the Illagers, which were the once thriving civilization that almost controlled the entire world at one point. Well, that's what they once were, as currently they were on a decline. In fact, they have been on this decline for the last 100,000 years, slowly losing their control, influence, and power over the world, as the villagers slowly began to reclaim their dominance of the land that they once ruled. And yet, this depression in power that the Illagers were feeling, well, it was all self-inflicted. You see, long ago, before this story began, the Illagers created a monster that they truly did believe would save their crumbling empire and would allow the Illagers to control the world once again. In fact, the Illagers were so confident that this new beast would allow them to control the world that they made the decision to pour all of their resources into it, making it the most powerful entity on the surface of the world at that time. However, that monster betrayed them and turned to aid their villagers in that war. And well, that was a devastating blow to the Illagers, as that monster held all their powers, and so now they were left without the bulk of their power. But luckily, on the flip side of that, they were able to scare that monster away into a deep, dormant state, meaning the villagers had just lost their newest and greatest ally. But it also meant that the Illagers had also lost something great: all their resources. Now, that monster, if you hadn't guessed it already, was the subscribe button. No, sorry, it was the Steve. And so, now that you understand that, let's head back to that dark, rainy night in the Dark Oak Forest. Now, it was on that night that an evoker was just walking through that forest, looking up at the mystical rain clouds. Now, to many, rain clouds and the rain associated with them were boring and an inconvenience to life. But not for that evoker. No, as he actually found all of this very fascinating, and he loved the rain. And well, on that night, the rain would change him and the Illagers in ways that no one could have predicted. As, while staring up at that rain, he noticed something in the distance, as he could see a strange blue light reflecting off the rain droplets. Now, that evoker was very confused at this, as that just wasn't normal. And so, for that reason, he went over to investigate the source of this strange light. And well, what he ended up seeing shocked him, as he was seeing a Steve. Now, the Steve wasn't fully there, but he was beginning to form. Now, that evoker just couldn't believe his eyes, as no one had seen a Steve in thousands of years at this point. In fact, most had even forgotten about him, and no one had any idea how he was made originally. They just knew they created him. And so that evoker saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, as if he just took that Steve back to the mansion, they could clone him, and then they could use those clones to regain dominance over the world. That was a genius idea, and so the evoker began to run towards that Steve, ready to steal him. However, as he began to do that, the Steve began to fade away, and he was fading rapidly. The evoker didn't know what to do. He wasn't going to make it over to him in time, and so impulsively, he activated his fangs and was able to bite off a small section of the Steve's skin before he vanished completely, never to be seen again. Now, this sounded like a failure, but it really wasn't, as just that small sample could potentially be all the Illagers need to resurrect the Steve. And so excitedly, that evoker ran back into the mansion, showing everyone else what he had found. And well, everyone else was shocked, and they couldn't believe that he had just found that. In fact, many were so shocked that they thought he was lying. However, he was soon proven to be telling the truth, as the leader of that mansion, whom was an elderly evoker, came forward and verified that sample as authentic. And so, after that, things began to change, as over the next few days, thousands of villagers flocked to that mansion, ready to witness the rebirth of their greatest asset. And so, once they were all ready, they placed that sample in a cloning device and turned it on. Everyone was excited, and they were all waiting, anticipating the moment of a new Steve arriving in their world. However, the device failed, prompting that the sample size was just too small to create a clone. As soon as that happened, disappointment filled the hearts of every Illager watching on, as they all began to believe that they were just doomed once again. But that was not entirely the case just yet, as over the next few years, many of the smartest Illagers would stay in that mansion and would work day in and day out, trying to expand this sample size to allow for a duplication to occur. As they filled in the missing DNA particles of that sample with that of a witch's DNA, as after all, they were the most genetically similar. And so, after months of infusing witch DNA, as well as adding some more self-duplicating totems of undying, which would allow for immortality to occur, they were finally ready to try again. And so, just as before, thousands, if not tens of thousands of villagers flocked over to that mansion to witness this miracle. And so, once they were all in place, the leading scientists turned on that machine. And well, it was working, as the machine began to go brighter and brighter by the second in a light green hue. And it began to shake, and a very loud sound could be heard all over that forest. And then, abruptly, it all stopped. The scientists ran over to that machine to see what had happened. But before they could, a creature broke out of it. It was their brand new creation, otherwise known as Alex. Now, this was not quite what the Illagers were expecting, but it was an improvement, as she did resemble the almighty Steve, and so the Illagers were all getting very excited with this new creation, and they couldn't wait to see what she would do to help the Illagers. However, before they could send her out on their first mission, they first needed to train her. And so it'd be, over the next few years, that Alex would spend every single day training, as she would spend the twilight hours of the day collecting resources around the world. Then she would spend the mornings of the day deep underground, mining even more resources and fighting monsters. Then, in the afternoons, she would spend her time up in the mansion, building with whatever she had mined and collected. And then, during the nights, she would spend her time in the mansion's arenas, fighting and training with professional Illager trainers. It was great, as not only was she becoming a great explorer, miner, combatant, and loyal followers to the Illagers, but also her imagination and resource collection allowed the mansions to improve drastically, as thanks to Alex, the mansions were becoming far neater and organised, as she helped forge a path to build literal paths within the mansion, as well as farms, and more complex prisons, and bigger storage areas. All was good in the mansions. In fact, due to Alex, all the woodland mansions within the world were being restored into a state beyond their former glory before they had the Steve. They were just so much better now. And thus, many villagers were very happy with Alex and her work. And so, after doing this for several years, she was finally deemed to be ready for her first solo mission, that being to kill an entire village by herself, leaving no survivors. And so, when she was ready, she left the mansion and began on an exploration to find her first village. Now, this took a number of days for Alex, as she had to swim through a river, jump over a ravine, and forage her way through a jungle. But it was all worth it, as just a few days later, she would find it a village. Yes, this was it, she thought. This was going to be her first target. And so, over the next few weeks, she stalked that village, learning all of the villagers' daily routine, knowing where they all lived, where they all worked, and what they all did throughout the day. She needed to know everything about these villagers so that she could exploit them at their weakest. And so it took her just over a month before she was able to gain the knowledge of all of that. And then she was ready for her invasion. And so to do that, she stealthily snuck her way into the village during the dead of night. First, she went for the golem, whom was the village protector, and she was able to kill it in just one hit. And she did all that very quietly. And then she moved over to the farmer's house, and once again, she very stealthily killed him without making a sound. And then she did the same with the butcher, and then with the armor smith, and then with the fisherman, until something happened that changed her raid and changed her life forever. As, while making her way over to the librarian's house, ready to kill him, she came across a young villager whom was just playing in the grass. He saw her, and so she knew what she had to do. She had to kill him before he could scream out for help. However, she just couldn't bring herself to do that, as this was just a young defenseless villager, and his large emerald eyes were just staring right at her and her sword. No, she just couldn't do it. Her emotions got the better of her, which should have been impossible, because she was a robot. She wasn't meant to have emotions. She was just meant to follow orders. And so, it was due to this break in her actions into following her emotions that her code broke. And thus, she changed from the callous killer that she once was to just an ordinary player. And so after that, she just stood there, staring at this innocent villager child. And she did that for the next few hours, until sunrise. And so it was then that she finally moved and told all the villagers what she had done, and she tried expressing how sorry she was to all of them. Now, many of the villagers were quite angry at her, as after all, she had just killed many of their friends and family. But really, many of them calmed down quite quickly, as they all realized that Alex truly had no choice in the matter when she was that evil robot. And many were just grateful that their lives were spared. They also remembered the great things that they were told that Steve did after being shown mercy. Or so the legend said. And so for that reason, the villagers accepted Alex into their village. And thus it would be, over the next few weeks, that Alex would spend her days helping the villagers. Be this by farming for them, fishing for them, or creating armor for them. However, although they all smiled and were generally grateful for her and her work there, she could still sense a slight aura of disappointment, almost as if they expected more of her, as after all, they were basing our expectations on that of the legendary Steve. And well, she just wasn't Steve. She wasn't as helpful, she wasn't as powerful, and she wasn't as useful. But still, Alex had an idea of how she might be able to change that, as she was aware that the Steve had built those impressive iron golems, which all the villagers loved and still use to this day. And so, perhaps, in her mind, to gain the respect of the villagers, then all she had to do was to just make a better golem. And so it would be, over the next few weeks, that Alex attempted to learn as much as she possibly could about the Iron Golem from that village. But then, once she had exhausted all the knowledge that this village had on the Golem, she moved on to their next village and attempted to collect all their knowledge that they had on the Iron Golems. And then, after that, she moved on to the next village and took all their knowledge. And then, she moved on to the next village and took all their knowledge, and so on. And thus, it was over the next 100 years that Alex travelled the world, going to thousands of villages, and she was able to learn everything there was to learn about the Iron Golems. However, she just didn't see a way how she could improve the current golem, as it was just so perfected. And thus, she began to believe that her idea of creating a better golem was just a complete failure and a waste of time. However, on one sunny morning, she read a book that changed everything, as she read a book about the witches, whom were disgraced villagers that possessed dark magical powers. And well, that got her thinking, as maybe she could ask them for help, as perhaps they might know how to improve the Iron Golem. And so with that in mind, she headed over to the disgusting swamps, where she would then swim through the diseased waters, jump across the dying lily pads, and climb the rotting trees, all so that she could find a witch hut. Now, typically, the witches would kill any being that ever tried going anywhere near the huts, let alone any being that ever tried to come along and speak to them. However, this Alex creature was different for the witches, as they just felt like she was one of them. And so for that reason, the witches felt comfortable around Alex. And thus, for that reason, they revealed many dark magic secrets to her. So many dark magic secrets, in fact, that Alex was soon able to discover what she might be able to do in order to create the most powerful golem in existence, as she learned of a ritual where she would need to coat an Iron Golem in the blood of 250 villagenoid beings, such as that of the evokers or pillagers. And then she needed to surround this golem in red light. And then all that's needed after that is just a simple binding spell and a ritual of calling upon the dead villagenoid beings. And then she'd have it. She'd have the most powerful golem in the entire universe. And thus, this new golem would possess many dark magical powers. This was an amazing discovery. And so, once she uncovered all of that, she decided to write down everything that she had learned, to create a manual almost on what she needed to do, just in case she ever forgets it. And so, once she did that, she then left the swamp and began to plan this ritual. But meanwhile, to all of that happening, the Illagers back in their mansion were waiting for Alex to return, as they were only expecting her to be gone for a few weeks, maybe a few months at a push. but she still hadn't returned just over a year later. And so, for that reason, the Illagers were growing very concerned for their grand creation. And so, for that reason, they ventured into the nearest village, where they asked all the villagers if they'd seen Alex. Now, the villagers weren't going to speak to them, as after all, the Illagers were their mortal enemies. However, after some slight persuasion, one villager revealed that Alex had actually turned against them and was off in the swamps talking to witches, learning about dark magic. Now, hearing that filled the Illagers with rage and anger, as they couldn't believe that Alex had escaped their grasp and had betrayed them, and that they had once again lost their greatest ally. And so, in a fit of rage, the Illagers decided to burn down that village and kill everyone. And thus would begin the Illagers' adventure all across the world, as they would start to travel to villages where they would then torture villagers for answers on where Alex was. Now, most villagers just had no idea who Alex even was, and so they were all brutally killed, as they served no purpose for the Illagers. But really, it didn't matter even if they did know something, as after revealing which direction she left in, they too would also be brutally killed. And so, as this wave of brutality spread across the world, Alex would soon learn that she was being hunted down by the evil Illagers. And so for that reason, she fled the mainland of the Minecraft world and began to travel from island to island, attempting to conceal her location from the Illagers. But still, even on those lonely islands, she continued her experimentation of dark magic, and well, over that time, she did learn one very interesting thing about golems that would change the trajectory of her life. That being that golems that were built on small islands by the sea over a few hundred years would have evolved to their surroundings, adapting the metallic cases so that they could become waterproof and could breathe underground, and they would also be more resistant to attacks. This was very interesting, and so once again she wrote this down in her book, knowing that when she makes her godly golem, she'll want to use one of those special island golems. However, to do that, she first had to learn of the location of an island village. And well, that just wasn't going to happen if she remained in isolation. And so, for that reason, she just had to return to the mainland to try and find a villager who knows where a village like that exists. And well, very luckily for Alex, in the first village that she encountered, she found a villager who knew the exact coordinates where an island village existed. And so, once he gave the coordinates to her, she once again wrote it down in her golem summoning manual. And so everything was going great for Alex, as she was remaining hidden from the Illagers, and she was now very close to being able to create the perfected godly golem. However, she would never be able to complete that mission, as, while sleeping that night, the Illagers arrived at that village, and well, as soon as they saw her, they were ready to take her back and attempt to control her once again. But as soon as she sees them, she just starts to run as fast as she possibly could. However, the Illagers saw her running, and although they couldn't run as fast as her, they were able to shoot her with a tracking arrow. This was bad, very bad, as the tracking arrow was laced with a potion that would last for 10,000 years, meaning the Illagers would definitely be able to reach her and control her, as they would just know where she is at all times, and she knew she wouldn't be able to run away for 10,000 years. She was doomed. But right now, she knew that her best course of action was to just keep running, which is what she would then do for the next few months, running through deserts and jungles and mountains and forests, all until she ended up in an isolated, snowy village, far, far away from any other life forms. And so, once she arrived in that cold village, she went up to the village leader, where she then explained her situation. And then, after that, she gave the book that she had been writing on how to create this godly golem, and she told him to keep it safe within that village, and to treat it like a valued relic for the next 10,000 years, and to not allow anyone or anything to get their hands on it until she returns. As her plan was to cast a spell onto herself, a spell that would put her into a deep sleep for the next 10,000 years, and would also move her into a hidden state where she would be safe from the evil illagers. Now, she would likely lose all of her memories from doing this, but that was okay. That villager had that book, and so as long as he kept it safe, then she should be able to complete this quest when she awakes, and is freed from that tracking curse. Now, this all sounded like a great plan, and to an extent, it was, as Alex was left unharmed for the next 10,000 years, and the illagers just had no idea where she went. However, there was a slight issue, as just a few decades after casting herself away, the illagers arrived at that isolated, snowy village, and they raided that village and killed all the villagers. However, that's not the worst part of that raid. No, the worst part was that an evoker found that book, and well, as Alex had written a detailed and clear manual on how to create this powerful beast, the illagers now knew how to create the most powerful golem in the universe. And thus, just a few hours later, the illagers set up a fleet of 1,000 of their strongest spellcasters, and they set off on an oceanic quest right to the coordinates specified in that book that Alex had so foolishly left behind. And so if you want to know what happened next, then you'll need to watch this video